My husband mocked my cheap panties, so I stayed silent until his secret was exposed at dinner. He humiliated me in front of everyone, called my panties cheap, old, worthless. I said nothing. I waited. Because I knew something he didn't. And when the truth came out at dinner, he was the one everyone looked at. If this story helps you understand that strategic silence is more powerful than immediate reaction, please like and subscribe. There are moments when someone humiliates you publicly, and your instinct is to defend yourself immediately, to confront the cruelty and demand acknowledgement of how hurtful their words were. But sometimes the more powerful response is strategic silence. Waiting for a moment when truth you know, but they don't realize you know, will expose them more completely than any immediate defense could achieve. When my husband Derek made cruel joke at dinner party about my cheap, worthless panties in front of our friends, when he used my underwear as punchline designed to get laughs at my expense while positioning himself as sophisticated person, tolerating his wife's lack of taste, my first instinct was hurt, and anger and desire to confront him about why he thought publicly mocking my clothing choices was acceptable behavior. But I stayed silent because I knew something Derek didn't realize I knew. That the reason he was so familiar with my underwear wasn't because he was my husband who occasionally saw what I wore, but because he'd been secretly taking my underwear and wearing it himself for months, behavior I'd discovered weeks earlier and had been documenting while deciding how to address it. So I waited, stayed silent through his cruel joke and through the uncomfortable laughter it generated, knowing that truth about why Derek knew so much about my underwear would expose itself soon enough in ways that would make his mockery backfire spectacularly. My name is Jessica Warner, and I'm 35 years old. I'd been married to Derek for 8 years when the dinner party incident happened that would expose his secret and would reveal that his cruel mockery of my cheap panties was projection based on his own shame about cross-dressing he'd been hiding from everyone, including me. Derek was 37, worked in marketing for tech company, was someone who cared significantly about appearances and status, and about being perceived as successful and sophisticated by our social circle. The pattern that had led to my discovery of Derek's cross-dressing had started about 3 months before the dinner party. I'd noticed that my underwear would occasionally go missing from my drawer. Not frequently, but often enough that I'd started paying attention to which items were disappearing and when. The missing items were usually my nicer underwear rather than my everyday basics, and they'd typically disappear when Derek had been home alone or when he'd been doing laundry. I'd initially questioned Derek about the missing items, asking if he'd seen them or if they might have gotten mixed in with his laundry. His responses had been dismissive and slightly mocking. He'd suggested I was probably just misplacing things or being disorganized, had made comments about how I needed better systems for keeping track of my belongings, had implied the problem was my carelessness rather than anything actually suspicious happening. But I'd known I wasn't being careless, had known the pattern of disappearances was too consistent to be random loss. So I'd started investigating more carefully, had set up small hidden camera in our bedroom to see if I could catch what was actually happening to my underwear when items went missing. What the camera had captured had been Derek going through my underwear drawer when he thought I was out, selecting specific items, and then changing into them in our bedroom before covering them with his regular clothes. He'd been cross-dressing using my underwear, wearing them under his work clothes when he'd leave for the office or run errands, keeping this aspect of his behavior completely hidden from me while dismissing my questions about missing items as me being disorganized and careless. The discovery had created complicated mix of emotions. Hurt that Derek had been taking my things without permission, confusion about what his cross-dressing meant for his identity and for our relationship, anger that he'd been dismissing my legitimate concerns while actually being the one taking my underwear. I'd considered confronting him immediately, but had decided instead to document the behavior more thoroughly and to wait for right moment to address it when I'd have complete information and strategic advantage. The dinner party where Derek's secret would be exposed had been gathering at our house with 3 other couples from our social circle, friends we'd known for years and whose opinions Derek cared about significantly. The evening had been going well until conversation had turned to topic of online shopping and consumer habits, and Derek had decided to make joke at my expense. Jessica buys the cheapest underwear she can find, Derek had announced to the table with condescending laugh. I keep telling her we can afford better quality, but she insists on these old cheap panties that probably cost about $2 each. I don't understand why she won't invest in something nicer when we have the money for it. The comment had been designed to get laughs while positioning Derek as sophisticated person whose wife's taste was disappointingly low class, had been cruel dig disguised as humorous observation about our relationship dynamics. Several people at table had laughed awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with Derek publicly mocking me, but not wanting to create tension by defending me against my own husband. I'd stayed quiet, had just smiled slightly, and had let Derek's comment hang in air without defending myself or explaining my underwear choices. Derek had seemed satisfied with getting his laugh, had moved conversation to different topic, had apparently believed his mockery had landed well without consequences. What Derek didn't know was that one of our guests, my friend Caroline, who'd arrived early to help with dinner preparation, had been upstairs using our bathroom earlier in evening and had accidentally witnessed something she'd immediately recognized as significant. She'd come out of bathroom just as Derek had been walking past carrying laundry basket, and had glimpsed through briefly open bedroom door what appeared to be women's underwear laid out on our bed in ways that didn't look like they were just being put away in drawer. Caroline had mentioned this to me quietly in kitchen while we'd been preparing dessert, asking if everything was okay and whether she'd misunderstood what she'd seen. I'd told her briefly that Derek had been taking and wearing my underwear without my knowledge, that I'd only recently discovered this and was still figuring out how to address it. Caroline had been shocked, but sympathetic, had asked if I wanted her to say something or if I preferred to handle it privately. I'll handle it, I'd told Caroline. But if opportunity arises for truth to come out naturally, I won't stop it from happening. The opportunity had come about 20 minutes after Derek's cruel joke about my cheap panties, when Caroline's husband James had made casual comment about how Derek seemed surprisingly knowledgeable about women's underwear for man who claimed to have no interest in fashion. How do you even know what Jessica's underwear costs? James had asked with genuine curiosity. I couldn't tell you what brand my wife wears, much less what price range. Derek had frozen slightly, had clearly realized he'd revealed more familiarity with my underwear than made sense for husband who'd just been mocking his wife's choices. He'd tried to deflect, had said something vague about noticing price tags when doing laundry. But his discomfort had been visible enough that people were starting to sense something odd about the interaction. Caroline had looked at me questioningly, silently asking if this was moment when truth should come out. I'd given her slight nod, permission to say what she'd observed if she chose to. I actually saw something interesting earlier tonight, Caroline had said carefully, her tone neutral, but her words deliberate. When I came out of the bathroom upstairs, I noticed through the bedroom door that there was women's underwear laid out on your bed, Derek. It looked like they were arranged deliberately, not like laundry that was being put away. At the time, I thought maybe Jessica had been getting dressed or something. But now that you're making jokes about her underwear choices while also apparently knowing quite a lot about them, I'm wondering if there's something you want to share about why you're so familiar with her underwear? The table had gone completely silent. Derek had turned pale, had looked between Caroline and me with expression that showed panic and dawning realization that his secret had been exposed, not through my confrontation, but through his own careless mockery, combining with someone else's accidental observation. I don't know what you think you saw, Derek had stammered, trying to deny what Caroline was suggesting, but his panic and his obvious discomfort made denial unconvincing, made clear that Caroline had indeed seen something significant that Derek had been trying to keep hidden. I'd decided this was moment to speak, to end Derek's denials, and to address openly what I'd been documenting privately for weeks. Caroline saw what she saw, because you've been wearing my underwear, Derek. I've known for about a month. I have video of you taking items from my drawer and changing into them. The reason you're so familiar with my underwear choices isn't because you're my husband who notices what I wear. It's because you've been taking my things and wearing them yourself, while keeping it completely secret from me. The revelation had created immediate awkward tension around dinner table. Guests who'd been laughing at Derek's cruel joke about my cheap panties were now confronted with information that Derek had been wearing those same panties himself, that his mockery had been projection based on his own shame about cross-dressing behavior he'd been hiding. The irony that Derek had publicly ridiculed underwear he'd been secretly wearing was obvious to everyone, made his earlier cruelty seem even more unjustified and more revealing about his own issues rather than about my choices. Derek had tried various responses: anger that I'd been recording him without his knowledge, attempts to minimize what the video showed by claiming he'd just been curious, or experimenting rather than engaging in sustained pattern, eventual breakdown where shame about his cross-dressing and about being exposed in front of friends overwhelmed his ability to maintain denials. The dinner party had ended shortly after, with guests making awkward excuses to leave early, and with obvious discomfort about having witnessed such private revelation. After everyone left, Derek and I had the confrontation that should have happened weeks earlier when I'd first discovered his cross-dressing, but that I'd postponed while documenting his behavior and while waiting for right moment to address it. "You humiliated me in front of our friends," I'd told Derek. "You made cruel joke about my underwear being cheap and worthless, used my clothing choices as punchline to make yourself look sophisticated. And you did it while secretly wearing those same panties you were mocking, while taking my things without permission and dismissing my questions about missing items as me being careless. The hypocrisy is staggering." Derek's response had cycled through several stages: shame about his cross-dressing being exposed publicly, anger about me letting the exposure happen at dinner party rather than confronting him privately, eventual recognition that his own cruel mockery had created the conditions for his secret to be revealed in ways that made him look significantly worse than if he'd just been honest from the beginning. The marriage didn't survive. While Derek's cross-dressing itself might have been something we could have worked through if he'd been honest about it, the combination of him taking my things without permission, dismissing my concerns while being the one causing them, publicly mocking me for clothing choices while secretly wearing the same items, and requiring me to document his behavior and wait for strategic moment to expose it rather than just being honest. All of it created comprehensive breach of trust that couldn't be rebuilt. 2 years after the dinner party where Derek's secret was exposed following his cruel mockery of my underwear, I'm 37 and living independently with much clearer understanding of difference between immediate emotional reaction and strategic silence, between defending yourself in moment when you're being attacked and waiting for truth to expose itself in ways that are more powerful than any defense you could offer. Derek, from what I hear through mutual friends who've maintained contact with both of us, has been more open about his cross-dressing post-divorce, has been working on the shame that led him to hide it, and to project that shame onto me through mockery of the very things he was secretly wearing himself. What I learned from Derek's public humiliation of me followed by strategic exposure of his secret is that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty isn't immediate confrontation, but rather silence that waits for moment when truth reveals itself in ways that make the cruelty backfire on person who delivered it. That projection is real and common pattern where people mock in others exactly what they're ashamed of in themselves. That strategic silence requires confidence that truth will ultimately be exposed, and that exposure will be more effective than any immediate defense could be. The moment Derek mocked my cheap, worthless panties in front of our friends had been cruel and hurtful, had been designed to humiliate me while making him look sophisticated. But my silence in that moment, my decision to wait rather than defend or explain, had created space for truth to emerge through Caroline's observation and through my eventual revelation about what I'd discovered and documented. Derek's mockery had exposed him more completely than it had exposed me, had revealed his hypocrisy and his shame, and his willingness to be cruel to cover his own insecurities. My name is Jessica Warner. My husband publicly mocked my underwear choices as cheap and worthless in front of friends, used my clothing as punchline to make himself look sophisticated. I stayed silent because I knew he'd been secretly taking and wearing those same panties, had been documenting his cross-dressing while deciding when to expose it. When truth came out at dinner, through combination of his revealing too much knowledge about my underwear and friends' observation of women's underwear laid out in our bedroom, he was the one everyone looked at with shock and judgment. His mockery had backfired completely, had exposed his hypocrisy and his secret in ways that made his cruelty seem even more unjustified. Strategic silence is sometimes more powerful than immediate reaction. Truth exposed at right moment accomplishes more than any defense delivered in heat of humiliation could achieve. Thank you for reading. If this story helps you understand that strategic silence is more powerful than immediate reaction, please like and subscribe.